So clinical update number 5 is from Dr. David Caldicott. Associate Professor Dr. David Caldicott is an emergency consultant at the emergency department in Calvary Hospital in Canberra, and is also a clinical senior lecturer in the Faculty of Medicine at the Australian National University. He's a spokesperson for the Australian Science Media Centre on issues on illicit drugs and the medical response to terrorism and disasters. Dr. Caldicott designed and piloted the Welsh Emergency Department investigation of novel substances project in the UK, a unique programme using regional emergency departments as sentinel monitoring hubs for the emergence and spread of novel illicit drug products associated with harm. He has replicated this work in Australia with the ACT Investigation of Novel Substance Group. He has published widely in the peer-reviewed literature and presents nationally and internationally on the subject of the use of emergency departments as observatories for the surveillance of novel psychotropic substances as they evolve, as well as their effects in acute overdose. He remains a staunch advocate for harm reduction, maintaining that drug policy is an issue of public health, not political morality. Thank you, David.
How are you? I'm David. I'm back, and it's lovely to be back here again. And I'm delighted. You're one of my favourite mobs. We have history. I don't know if you know that we have history, but we do. I'm going to talk to you about new illicit drugs and kind of what we're likely to see this summer. Well, what we're all likely to see this summer. So, what have you all been up to? Because frankly, you know, this is sort of an academic booty call for me. You know, you invited me to speak at your conference in Adelaide back in 2000 and something, and not a word, not a phone call, not a letter, nothing at all. And then now when it's convenient to you, you want me to come back and tax. Well, I've been busy too, you know. I have a life. I married one of your mob, and look what happened to me. I'm like Mr. Bennett. And it's just a joy to be back again. I'll start with this. A lot of people look at me askance. I see myself very much like Cassandra. I don't know if you know, sort of a hirsute Irish Cassandra. I don't know if you know the story of Cassandra. It's the mythology of somebody doing a god wrong and being gifted with the gift of prophecy and the curse of no one ever believing them. And this is kind of where I come at with regards to illicit drugs. I'm pretty good at spotting what's coming. And every year I tell everybody and nobody pays any attention to me and everybody dies. So, you know, let's go through this again then. Yeah, let's see how right I am this time. So, is there a problem? Well, yes, hell yes, there's a huge problem. This is one of the medical equivalents of climate change, you know, between what is being done and what should be done. Here, this is latest data now. So this is the rates of death from drug overdose around the world. There's lots more countries in the world, as you'll know. As many of you will know, it is Australia, so some of you might think that's it, but there's far more than that. And some countries are doing just smashing. So places like Portugal have got 7 deaths per million population per annum, which is just awesome. Somewhere in the middle, you have the European Union. The UK isn't doing too bad. They're actually disappointed with their results. But Australia is just hovering above Sweden, which is catastrophic. And frankly, I think most people have given up on the United States as a country, never mind as a source of policy. But Australia has 10 times the number of drug-related deaths. And what we're doing about it is exactly what we were doing about it 20 years ago. Despite the problem having evolved beyond recognition, we're just doing the same thing. So yes, there's a problem. And what's worse, we're not doing anything useful about it. So I thought I'd start. Does anybody know what this is? Yes, indeed. Hail Hydra, I say. Obviously, the bad guys from G.I. Joe. And this is kind of what we're dealing with. And it's not entirely an inapt analogy, because the more heads you cut off the novel psychotropic drugs market, the more grow back. And this is from a very nice little paper in Sweden, where because their drugs policy is so bad, they have great experience in dealing with overdoses. And this is the sort of thing that we see. This is the sort of thing that I'm trying to do in the ACT, is using the emergency department to identify drugs as they come out way before they become sort of mainstream. And if you look closely there, you can see a series of bizarre acronyms which represent new drugs, but they're all being identified in emergency departments before they're being certified by drug control agencies. So this is a very fertile area for picking up new drugs as they emerge. Because, of course, where do people go when they get hurt by drugs? Gosh, I won't know. So today I thought I would talk to you about something old, something new, something borrowed, and something blue. So, something old. All of you have probably used one of these at some stage in your lives. The more mature elders of the tribe probably were speed users while listening to Boney M or whatever it was in that era. The millennials have sort of crossed through their meth phase, and MDMA is back in fashion again. So you can see it's pretty simple stuff. A man like myself wouldn't be able to understand if it wasn't this simple. But it's all about scaffoldings and side groups. And you see, if you add little bits on, it's like a big furry tennis ball. And if you add Velcro table tennis balls on the side, you can change the properties. And that's kind of how drug chemists work. I know, because I speak to them. But one of the big problems with MDMA, or ecstasy, which we all know was around, in the sort of acid house years in the... You look like a man who'd be familiar with... No, yeah. That's right. When did you say you came out from the UK? What year?
Some years ago.
Yeah. So mid-80s, late 90s, ecstasy was kind of there. It started. But it's changed. And the way that it's changed now, these things have rebrandings. It's often called Molly. There is crystal MDMA, which is of high purity. And so whereas you might need 75 milligrams this evening to get you to the place that you need to be for your party, what we're now seeing are pills and tablets that contain 200 milligrams or 300 milligrams. Now, Australia has never been known for its ability to abstain or moderate. So your average Australian at a music festival will sit down and go, Jesus, this is fucking lovely. I'm going to have 3 of these. Now, and given the purity of the market, that's traditionally been fine. But if you're dealing with 200 or 300 milligram pills, that is going to bring you to us, to all of us. We will see you if you get that far. That's a lethal dose. And so friends of mine in Europe who we chat to, who are doing what I want to be doing, which is pill testing at music festivals, are identifying in this environment pills that are very dangerous. Pills that are in fact pressed with the logos of the festivals themselves. We are in an era of concierge pill manufacture. And of course, the approach that we've taken traditionally has gone nowhere near to dealing with this at all. This is from this year, looking at these outliers. So in the Netherlands, they actually have a static drug testing system. Every week on a Wednesday, you can rock up to any pharmacy that you fancy and submit your pill for analysis. And they, of course, obviously, now know everything about every pill that's on the market. It's a terrible idea. It's immoral. And they are seeing, again, these very high purity pills that are emerging. And these are going to hurt young Australians this year. Prediction number 1. This is something that's interesting that we saw, I don't know if you recall, earlier in the year in Melbourne. A load of people, I think 30 people dropped on one night. Revolver. I want to say Revolver was the name of the club. Oh, yeah. So there's somebody's obviously, you might have been there on the night, ma'am, yes? Yeah, of course. So, and colleagues of mine sent it to Europe for analysis. And interestingly, what they found were some very interesting novel products here. So fluorinated products, which last much longer, coupled to MDMA. So mixtures of MDMA and novel psychotropic substances. This makes me nervous. The reason why this makes me nervous is because we know for a fact that thousands of young Australians are already using pill testing kits. These are, you'll see them, the little color changing kits. I actually don't rate them anymore because there are far more products in the market than these can keep up with. But were you to use one of these kits and were it to tell you, as this would, that there was some MDMA in there, you might labor under the misconception that there was nothing else. And then you could come to us again. This lecture is largely about stopping people coming to us, or if they have to, they should. But we want to stop people getting sick before they actually eat anything. This is my little group, the Actinos group, and we identified the same product in a different music festival in Canberra. And the system that we have in place, which I commend to you all, I'm very happy to share. We're big open science folk. But if anybody rocks up to my emergency department and they're in possession of something that looks untoward, they're given an option. And this is with the blessing of law enforcement and public health. You can either surrender it to law enforcement or you can surrender it to the doctor. And do you know, in the 5 years I've been running this, not one person has opted for the law enforcement option. So as a consequence, I've got a pretty good idea what's going through our emergency department. It's not for everything. I mean, you guys know, because I would imagine, how many people in this room, just a show of hands, if you're faced with an illicit product in the department, either put it in a sharp bin or flush it? Put your hands up. So that's kind of what people are doing. Far better to, in fact, test it first and then use that information to undermine the confidence in the market. And so what we do is we do the analysis and we do the literature review and we provide the consumer one-on-one, because if we know anything about millennials, we know that they love themselves. We give the person who has come to us with the drug a report for themselves to take away and scare their friends with. Unfortunately, not a lot of people agree with us. We've got a system, our colleagues in Melbourne actually knew what had caused these overdoses. The forensic teams had done this analysis and chose not to release this information. You cannot underestimate the utility of this information in persuading young people that the market in its entirety is not safe. And yet, politically, there's not a great deal of appetite for that. Why something new? I'm sorry, I love a story, so I'm going to tell you a story. So cast your minds back. I don't know what you were doing. Most of you probably weren't born in 2002. But in 2002, Chechen rebels took the Dubrovka theatre siege. No, it's not like they took a couple of people, they took the whole damn theatre siege. I don't know if you know much about Chechen rebels, and I'll apologize for people who aren't Chechen terrorists in the audience, but coming from Chechnya. The first Red Cross team that was sent to Chechnya after the collapse of the Soviet Empire was beheaded in its entirety within a fortnight of arriving in Chechnya. So when we heard that the Chechens were involved in this, we had a gut feeling it wasn't going to go well, particularly with 850 hostages involved. And around about 5 a.m. on the morning of a few days later, the Spetsnaz, which is the special ops group from the FSB, which is what the KGB used to be, they released a mystery gas into the theatre and then breached. Not in the sort of obstetric way, but in this kicking down the door. And they, as the Russians do, they just went in and they shot all the Chechens. There was not a lot of discussion. No Chechens made it alive. But 170 of the hostages were actually killed by the gas. Now, we were watching this because of my other interests, going, Jesus, what the hell is that? This happens in the Bourne Identity, it happens in James Bond, but you think about it. If you want to put your finger on something that'll, say, knock out all of this, maybe 4 times this size, everybody here, within seconds, so they can't detonate a bomb, that's something special. So this is them, and this is the footage that we looked at over and over again. We couldn't work out what it was. Everybody was unconscious. It has to work almost immediately. There's dark elements to this story. The the people who survived were taken in private coaches to local hospitals. They appeared, I remember quite clearly noting that they appeared apneic. They were too far away to see what their pupils were up to, but we heard that they looked as if they had pinned pupils. But the darker side of this is the people who actually died were just lumbered into school buses and kept there to give the impression that in fact everything was okay. And then what happened was, of course, the secret services from all around the world wanted a bit of this. Like literally, we're getting pieces of clothes and sent some to Porton. And only just in the last 5 years has this information been declassified. And it was a gas of a product, a mixed product, but mostly a substance called carfentanil. And it's a fentanyl. It's a fentanyl, an analog of fentanyl. You're going to hear this word, fentanylogs. So the fentanyl mimics. This is the thing that scares me at the moment. Because this is a drug that's very well known within our veterinary community. Because it's used to knock out elephants. It's used to knock out elephants at the same sort of dose that fentanyl is used to relieve pain. In humans. There is not a lot of case reportage on this. There is a large animal veterinarian from North America who was attempting to contain a rogue elk, which sounds tremendous fun. And in doing so, loading his dart, and one of the things about playing with this drug is you mandatorily have to have somebody with you to resuscitate you if you should get it on you. He flicked a little bit of it onto the surface of his conjunctiva. And a few minutes later, he was down. That is the drug we're dealing with here. So these fentanylogs now are very significant. And they're enormous in North America. And we are treading exactly in the footsteps of how North America got to this space. So you have had a heroin problem, which has come and gone to a great deal, or at least balanced. You have an opiate problem in the United States, or had, and then cutting down on that and making life hard for people to get their analgesia, to which they'd become habituated, meant that the people, the white-collar people, we're not talking about deros and flannel shirts and with mullets and stuff. We're talking about white-collar people who may have originally gone into hospital for a broken ankle. Veterans, they are now turning to illicit forms which are very widely available and far more potent. Far more potent. And once again, it's kind of like, you know, chemical Legos. You change the side group and you change the potency and how it works. I don't know, this is a bit of a useless slide, but I thought I'd show you. You can see, so fentanyl is down here at the bottom, 4 from the bottom, and the effective dose is quite small, but it is certainly significantly larger than that of carfentanil. And yet the lethal dose, the LD50, the amount required to kill half of consumers is somewhat similar. So it seems a little bit unusual, and it's not really certain why some of these fentanylogs are so lethal in overdose. We've always assumed that it's just because of respiratory arrest, and people aren't, in fact, just getting to hospital in time for somebody to breathe for them. Or they, obviously, in some places, you don't have access to naloxone in the community, which is just like mandatory. Everybody should have that now. But this is something that's interesting. It might be due to an additional effect. You do see this. Our anesthetic colleagues describe it occasionally. And it might be something that's actually accentuated in illicit fentanyl overdose, that in fact the ability to breathe is impaired itself, not just the drive, but that in fact the compliance of the chest wall is changed by fentanyl. So this is huge overseas. Everybody is talking about it. It has made the editorial of the New England Journal of Medicine. We're not talking about it here. Every time any of us start talking about opiate problems in Australia, we get a whole bunch of strange Purdue Pharma or whoever they are, bots attacking us for, you know, committing ourselves to oligopharmacy and all that sort of nonsense. So this is not being talked about in the manner and with the urgency that we should be talking about it. Cuyahoga County, that's Chicago. And this is what's happening at the moment. It is swamping everything else. This, I think, is the most telling thing. You go to school, 2 of your kids are killed by gunfire. You go home and you say it was a dull day. And that's now not the case because fentanyl is killing more people than firearms injuries in this county. And that says a lot. That says a lot for Chicago. It's a rough place. And this is from this week. So the 2016 data has just been released, and fentanyl deaths are rising exponentially. You know, some people say, oh, it's exponential. It's mostly not. This is exponentially. This is really, truly, mathematically exponential rise. And I was very interested to hear my colleague talk about infectious diseases, because I think there's huge analogies between illicit drugs and infectious diseases. We should be tracking these in the same way as we track flu. And if for a second any of you believe that illicit drugs cannot travel as fast, if not faster, than infectious diseases, you're deluded. Very worrying. So we've seen fentanyl now contaminating the cocaine market. People who use cocaine are expecting a certain effect, which is very far removed from opiates. And they use it in an enthusiastic manner, which in a tarnished market will result in their death. My friends in Ireland are even seeing it. They still call themselves the drug squad. So look, here's the thing. Our friends, the people that you and I babysit, I'm the JMO supervisor for my department. I feel your pain. JMO, the junior medical officers. And you're going to come to their rescue this season, because you're going to see this season. And you all know what to do with opiate overdoses. You know, you try to reverse them. You make them breathe. You don't get them so leery that they want to punch you in the mouth. You titrate to circulation and respiration. But the difference here is that my colleagues in the eastern seaboard of the United States of America, does anybody know what a vial of naloxone, how much naloxone there is in the vial? 400 mics, there you go. So that's micrograms. So colleagues on the eastern seaboard of the United States are talking about reversing opiate-like overdoses with 20 milligrams. So buy shares, I say, buy shares. So look, I have no hard and fast rule. I know what I do that works in my shop, and if it walks like an opiate overdose and it quacks like an opiate overdose, that's where I'm going to start. Look, it could be hypercarbia secondary to CO2 or to exposure to CO2. It could be a pontine bleed, you know. But if they're found in a public toilet with a tourniquet on and a needle in their arm, I'm going to go there first, and I'm going to keep doubling the dose until I get something. And I've got quite high recently, so I think this is around. It's in Canberra. If it's in Canberra, which is very proper, I know you got it. Yeah. Something borrowed. So when is a novel substance overdose not a novel substance overdose? When it's an encephalitis. I don't know, have you guys come across this? It's very interesting. This is a new type of cephalitis. It's probably not new at all. We've probably just, started to describe it. But we've just started to describe a lot of it. And it presents very similar to an overdose. So it's an encephalitis that's caused by the creation of antibodies to the NMDA receptor. If you look back to your nursing education, you'll know that's where ketamine plays. But it's antibody-based. And this is the surge, only in the last 10 years, of the number of cases reported. It's not a lot. But again, I've seen 2 in the last 5 years that I've been in Canberra. So it's out there. And I think the thing that's most interesting about it is that a lot of the time it presents with either psychiatric symptoms in young people or with seizures, which are also very much associated with the modern range. And then your patient is admitted, they keep on behaving odd, they keep on having seizures, their urine drug screen is negative. Have a think of this. You could be the clever person to make the call. Something blue. Say hello to my new friend. This is my toy. This is a Bruker time-of-flight infrared spectrophotometer. And with this, I shall be traveling around Australia testing drugs at music festivals. Not because I have a particular interest in the music, drum and bass killed it for me, but because I think it's the only way to keep track of what's on the market. It's not the best analytical piece of kit that's out there. It's robust. And I don't need the best analytical kit because I'm not trying to create a legal case against anyone. I'm trying to use this data to prevent young people from putting things in their mouth. The combination of giving them any information coming from a medical professional, be it one of our emergency nurses or myself, is very persuasive. Far more persuasive than merely telling them that you're just naughty and you're going to hell if you use drugs. And this is something that's been on the cards for quite some time. Contrary to popular belief, the AMA, we had a very robust debate about this back in 2005, but they have been supporting a trial of it since then. The current president, I don't think, remembers this, but it's all, I keep on sending it to him when he keeps on saying that pill testing is a bad idea. The ACT AMA is fully behind it. This is from the Australian Drug Summit back in, I think it was April 2016. And there's some very important people there and a fat Irish dude. But their assessment is that drug checking presents a valuable option and trials should be implemented as a matter of priority. There's no dissent within the field. There's nobody who thinks that this makes people use more drugs. There's, the politicians, people with acquired brain injury. These are the people who come up with that sort of idea, but not people who know anything about this field. So you will see this, because we're going to go hard at it. Today is an interesting day, because you may have seen that we were given permission recently to do pill testing at Spilt Milk in Canberra, which was a good day. Yesterday, we were told that the federal government had decided to block that, which was a bad day. It's a roller coaster trip, what can I tell you? But that's all right. This reminds me a great deal of me growing up in Ireland, a hypersexual young Catholic boy with a deviant desire to acquire condoms and being unable to do so because you needed at that time a prescription to get them. The irony of it all, goodness. And then a generation died. And common sense prevailed. And that's what's going to happen in Australia. The strange, crazy folk with the tin hats on their heads who are denying climate change and the idea that harm minimization is a good idea, they'll all die eventually. And then Australia can truly rise up and be the world power that it should be. So look, I wish I could tell you it's all going to be grand this summer and everything's fine. But that's crap, I'm afraid. It's just going to be shite. And this is, to refer back to my fixation on Game of Thrones, the winter is coming. It's going to be a bad season. I don't know if you noticed, it's very early in the season, but last weekend there were 11 deaths, 11 overdoses in Newcastle from a blue Superman pill. Now, if I'd been there, I'd already be able to tell you what was in it. But we have no idea. So we're in a difficult space because everybody, like climate change, everybody knows, like marriage equality, everybody knows what should be done. The coroners are saying what should be done in Victoria, and yet there's a little bit of dissonance in, I think the term is knowledge translation. Our political friends aren't really getting into it in a big way. The doctors are even getting on board, and that's very unusual. It's a terrible conservative mob. You guys are far more fun to play with. Well, the people are telling us that it can't be done, despite the fact that there are thousands of people doing it all around the world already. So I think I saw with interest, because I've been following you, because that's what I do. I saw Gillian Triggs speaking to you. Was it on your first day, was it? Talking about your role of advocacy. And I couldn't agree with you more. I think you guys are far better advocates than the medical profession, because you're crazy fierce, and you have this built into you of being an advocate. Does anybody recognize the significance of a safety pin? I wear a safety pin. It reminds me to resist. It reminds me to resist that which I think is wrong. In Holland, in the Second World War, when the Nazis were taking over and shooting Jewish people and shooting homosexuals, people would know that there was a safe place that you could talk if your friend was wearing a safety pin. And so then, and also the sign of the resistance of Rogue One. I mean, you can't have Star Wars without resistance either. So I want to leave you with this concept of resistance. There is science and there is medicine, and over there, under a stone, there is politics. And you have always got to stand for the science. It is very simple because it's so obvious. The jury has left the building. So please, stand hard, stand fast, and stand for the science in this space. I'm delighted. You know, we're going to win this debate because I got dragons on my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David, very much for a fantastic session.